The
Okay.
presentation. Yeah.
Okay, you can see the presentation, which is
Yeah.
good. Okay. So what I'll do is so quick brief about me. I've spent over 15 years in the SAP space predominantly, but I've also worked with a number of ERP, CRM, HRIS, payroll implementations across quite a few geographies, including India, Africa, and the Asia Pacific. What's also interesting is by chance rather than by choice, I've also had the opportunity to be part of a number of troubled projects or projects that have been pretty close to being a complete disaster. Now, when I initially started, I used to work with KPMG across India and New Zealand, and I live in New Zealand now. I'm settled here. So when I initially started, it used to be painful because each one of you, I presume, with your level of experience, has been through some or the other troubled projects, and you can imagine the kind of stress these projects can cause. So it was painful. But then as I went through, I learned quite a bit. And, in fact, it has been very helpful for me in the way I service clients, coming in from a lens of what goes through in a troubled project or a project very close to disaster. As a result of that, I've also studied a number of these failures to see what learnings can you leverage out of that. And this session essentially talks about some of that. That's a bit of brief about me. What do? I essentially run my own practice currently, which is focused on mentoring, coaching, and public speaking around digital transformations, enterprise applications, and projects in general. I also help a lot of organizations here in New Zealand with project recovery. So where they've got a troubled project and they need somebody to help it recover it, put together a plan from where they can go on. I help with that. And I also help with a lot of enterprise application strategy, right from conceptualization to operationalization, including setting up the operating model. I also published my first book earlier this year, Reboot, which unsurprisingly is about recovering troubled projects. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that a bit later. So that's enough about me. I think, I don't want to keep talking about myself. It'll get too philosophical. So now so I'm presuming I've had a chat with Mukesh, and what I understand is each one of your organizations have one or the other form of digital transformation initiative currently in progress. So one of the things that we discussed is first setting the context of why we need to look at this from a lens of troubled and failed projects, and what lessons can we derive from there. So to start with, if you look at it, BCG does what they call an evolving state of digital transformation survey. And unsurprisingly, about 80% of the organizations they surveyed across the globe have plans to accelerate their digital transformation. Now, that's not a surprise given what's happened over the last year and a half. In fact, we are approaching 2 years now with this pandemic and the associated consequences that have come with that. So that's 80% of the organizations who are focusing on accelerating their digital transformation. It's also proven that organizations that can successfully land digital transformations on an average experience about 1.8 times growth in revenue compared to those who struggle to do that, or what we call as digital laggards. So that's the revenue part of it. From an overall enterprise value perspective, this is about twice. So there's a clear case on why organizations are, embarking on digital transformations and why this is a key strategy that they have in them trying to be far more relevant to their customers. So I don't think any of you need convincing on why a digital transformation is important to a business. However, The interesting part of the same survey is that the odds are stacked completely against you. And I don't mean this to create scare or panic or anything like that. I'm pretty sure with the audience we have here, all of you have enough scars on you to understand this. But the fact remains that 70% of digital transformation initiatives that are undertaken by organizations across the world fail to deliver on the envisaged outcomes. And so you wonder if 80% of them are trying to push harder and 70% is the failure rate, or failure rate is probably a bit of an overstatement, but if 70% of them do not deliver to the envisaged outcomes, you can imagine the risk in trying to run faster. So what can we do about it? Now, when you run projects and programs of work and they're successful, everybody is interested in the cake, right? And I know ServiceNow probably started that trend. I'm not sure of these custom-made cakes, which represent how your individual business operates, and SuccessFactors do the same. So it's all about the cake, right? And once the cake has been consumed, which means you've gone live, very quickly the program team vanishes and reality starts to sink in. And that's when you sort of go, oh, what hit us? Okay, it's almost like you've been running, and suddenly you come to a stage where the realization hits. So if you look at that and what's happening with the amount of digital transformation initiatives that are kicking on, I personally believe there's a bit of a storm gathering. And just relying on successes and looking at success stories is probably not going to help us cover some of the things that we need to be watchful of when we embark on digital transformations. The other reason we look at this kind of a topic is also because, based on a McKinsey survey that was done a few years ago, 17% of IT-driven programs go so horribly wrong that they threaten the very existence of the organizations that are embarking on them. And we'll talk about some of them in this session. So all the more important that we talk about it. Now, I could easily start and go out here and tell you all the things that you need to take care of when you are embarking on a digital transformation. Okay, and none of this hopefully should surprise any of you. So, people, the customer, having the right leadership, focusing on the data, focusing on communication, culture, change, outcomes, leveraging best practice. Look, I can go on. But none of this should surprise any of you. In fact, if it does, then that's a different problem that we need to discuss. But I'm presuming none of this surprises you. So if none of this surprises you, and the failure rates are still the same that they were a few years ago, what are the things that we can look at from failed projects? Because that's the next best alternative we have. Because successful projects tell you these are the areas which you can see on the screen that we need to focus on. Now, you know that. You've been doing work in that space. Even after all of this, if you're struggling with your digital transformation initiative, then it's probably worth exploring the other side of such initiatives, which are the failed ones or which are the troubled ones, and then see what we can learn from them. Because at the core of this is risk. When you embark on a digital transformation initiative, you are assuming a significant amount of risk. And irrespective of how we position this, you are managing risk. And this is what keeps the whole focus right. Because end of the day, the question always, whether it's at the board level, at the exec level, is about what's the risk of things going pear-shaped and what's the impact and how can we manage that? So this is a view of how do we look at it from a failed projects perspective. I'll probably take a pause here and invite maybe a couple of you to unmute yourselves and share if this resonates with you. Do you see how this is relevant?
Yeah, no, I think I've added comments in the chat as to why and everything else. So yes, it is relevant. Yeah.
Right. Sorry, I just realized that I do not have my chat on. So I have done this. Thank you so much. So here we go. Okay. And what I'll do over the next few minutes is actually take you through some key learnings that I've had through my experience of leading these kind of initiatives for organizations, especially the troubled ones, and what I've learned through the failed implementations, where I've been consciously researching to see what's lying in there. There's a lot of gold in these kind of projects as well. So here we go. Right? Oops, sorry, too fast. The first one, start before you're ready at every stage. And what I mean by this is as follows. Now, I'm assuming, this is more relevant to a digital transformation initiative that's mid-flight. It's equally relevant to organizations who are planning to embark on digital transformation initiatives. But it's far more relevant at in mid-flight. And this quote really comes from a best-selling author called Stephen Pressfield, who quotes this in his book, Do the Work. So just in terms of attribution. Now, what we mean by this is a lot of digital transformation initiatives start off as business-led, and that's okay. But at some point, technology and IT starts to play a larger role. Now, equally, when you land, it still has to be business-led. Now, the key that I've learned from a lot of troubled implementations is they start preparing for that transition and having the business or IT front up probably at the wrong times or slightly incorrect times. So here's an example. Right at the start of how this project is conceptualized, you would like the business to lead it. You would like the business to drive the case for why this needs to happen, and IT as an enabler. But then as the project starts to ramp up, you would expect IT to provide the guidance, set up frameworks so that the business can then jump on again and take charge when you come to the testing and, change management, those kind of aspects. And finally, when this lands, you can make sure it's operationalized quickly. However, in a number of troubled projects, you find that this transition and this shift of focus is done very late. They don't think about, the operating model, which we will talk about, when the project's in flight. The focus is all on the project. So, everybody is scrambling to get things to go live. And then suddenly the go live approaches and you do not know what the road ahead looks like. So the first learning that you get from troubled projects is start before you're ready. So a common example is people think, oh, why should we start the deployment planning from day one when the design and build is going on? The fact is, if you don't do that, you don't get enough rehearsals. And by the time you come to go live, you're scrambling. And the risk of you disrupting or breaking something that's already in train is pretty high. So that's an example of doing this. Now, a common example, a case study for this would be the Sacramento City Unified School District, who way back in 2013 tried to implement Workday for their finance, payroll, and HR systems. And 3 or 4 years down the line, they just ditched it. They completely ditched it. They spent millions of dollars in the hope that this would help them, enhance their effectiveness and efficiencies, but they finally ended up ditching it. Now, we all know, how Workday works, and it's almost equivalent from an SAP perspective when it comes to HR solutions. They also have a finance kind of solution. But what was critical in the Sacramento schools district implementation was that the whole reliance was on Workday and the consultants to do a lot of the work. The business themselves were never ready. And by the time they became aware of when they need to be ready, it was too late. And they came to a stage where they hadn't planned testing, and they got about 70% accuracy in their payroll testing. Now, you can imagine what that would mean if 30 people out of 100 are not paid accurately as per the time when they need to be paid. You can imagine the kind of disruption that will create. So that's an example of starting well before you're ready. So we move on. The next one is your organization is the puzzle. A lot of organizations, and I'm sure this probably resonates with a number of you, are undergoing a whole heap of agile transformations currently. So you're busy transforming your organization from the traditional divisions and departments and functions to squads and tribes and chapters and, lest I say, gangs. That's my own making. So there's no agile transformation that create gangs, but that's what's happening. Now, fundamentally, that's a shift in the ways of working. That's a shift in the mindset. That's a shift for the organization to collaborate with each other. Now, typically, digital transformation initiatives are large enterprise-wide initiatives that spread across a number of business functions, whether it be sales, operations, finance, customer services, HR, contact center, logistics, procurement, you name it. Digital transformation initiatives cover the functions that any organization would have. Now, the challenge that a lot of projects, especially big troubled projects, face is trying to fit into this kind of an organization. I'm currently working with a large retailer out here in New Zealand who are running a number of big ticket enterprise application programs as part of their overall digital transformation initiative. So this is an organization that has an ERP, a master data management, a CRM, an HRIS payroll, a merchandising system replacement, which is the core of retail, all of them running almost in parallel. And they've also undergone a complete organization redesign to what they call as an agile organization. Now, if you look at this whole agile transformation business, there's a lot of buzz around it currently. Pretty similar to big data a few years ago, pretty similar to analytics, pretty similar to cloud. There's a lot of buzz around agile transformation. And Spotify is the poster child for this. So everybody wants to become the next Spotify. But what people struggle to realize is if it was as easy to copy an organization structure and just implement it, I think this would have been done by organizations across the world and we wouldn't be talking about it. There wouldn't be huge amounts of effort, programs of work going into it. And at the heart of it is a lot of the ways of working, the trust and the mindsets that underpin an agile transformation. And typically, enterprise application sort of programs, the digital transformation ones, struggle to fit into an agile organization. So there are two schools of thought. One is you let the programs run completely isolated to the business, and eventually you run into trouble. The other school of thought is you try and fit them into the agile organization and cripple them. Okay. Now, programs of this nature require a lot of autonomy to keep the momentum going. And all of you probably are aware of the amount of energy it takes to keep things going. And if you are then saddled with all this bureaucracy and the tribes and the quarterly business reviews and OKRs, those kind of things, which become so bureaucratically difficult for you to manage, it will have an implication on how the digital transformation delivers. So cracking that puzzle, and look, there's no clear answer, but addressing it head on and having a conversation and working out how this is going to fit and how this will work when the program's in flight and when the program lands is critical to success. So that's where, the puzzle of the organization itself and how these programs fit in, fall in place. Now, let's come down a little bit. So I've been talking about a fairly high level sort of construct. Let's come down a little bit. Now, add-ons are not always cheap. So what do I mean by that? Now, if you look at Zoom as an example, and I know it's a very small sort of piece in the overall digital transformation journey, but as an individual, I use Zoom for my practice, and it's great, right? Now, organizations use Zoom, they use Teams. There are a number of these in organizations across the world. Now, Zoom has a basic feature, which is pretty cheap. But then if you want to run webinars on Zoom, it's far more expensive. Same thing with a number of other enterprise applications. For example, if you look at, I know SuccessFactors, so I'll probably quote SuccessFactors here. And if you look at the recruitment module, the recruitment module subscription itself is fairly, well understood. But what's not well understood, and this is, I'm talking from experience of helping a couple of government clients here in New Zealand, is that for each job application that you post, you have a fixed number of credits that come with your subscription. And if you exceed that, you then have to purchase these credits. Now, quite often organizations get caught up in this. And they then struggle to justify this because it hasn't been factored into the operating expenses. It hasn't been factored into their ongoing business operations, and they struggle. So it's something worth watching out for. The other type of add-ons are when people try to go overboard and introduce new technology on top of technologies to make things work or make things easier for their users. An example is WalkMe. So here's what happened. I walked into a government organization with about 10,000 people, and they were implementing SuccessFactors, which and integrating with SAP HR for their payroll. And that's how they were supposed to run it. Now, in this government organization, the diversity of the workforce was phenomenal. So right from people who would dig cemeteries and for burying people, burying the dead, to engineers and town planners and accountants and consultants, that was the diversity within this organization. Now, to try and make things easier, on top of SuccessFactors, they were considering a solution called WalkMe. Now, for those of you who are not aware, WalkMe is like, if you remember the old Excel and Word, there used to be this cartoon character which looked like a paperclip that used to come and tell you what to do. So if you were stuck, it would come and talk about the help and where you can navigate. So WalkMe is sort of that. And this organization had purchased the subscription for WalkMe for a 3-year subscription, which they couldn't get out of. And they were insistent on implementing it. And the challenge they had was they just couldn't even get the basic SuccessFactors and SAP HR working together. When you dug deep, what we understood was not only did implementing this WalkMe solution require far more effort, which was never factored in, but every time success factors went through an upgrade and we adopted new functionality, there had to be a separate maintenance for these add-ons as well. So that's what I mentioned when I say add-ons are not necessarily cheap. It's something that digital transformation initiatives normally overlook, especially when you've got so many big things to take care of. These kind of small leaks in the boat start coming up, and before you realize, you've suddenly created something that's larger than life, and then you have to face the consequences of it. Now, this one I'm sure will resonate with most of you. Now, I personally believe implementing technology is easy, and I don't mean any disrespect, or I'm not trying to degrade the amount of complexity and effort involved in implementing technology as part of a digital transformation initiative. But what's interesting to note is, if implementing technology is easy, using Excel is far more easier. I'll give you an example. I was leading a data migration initiative for a large telecom organization back in South Africa a few years ago. And we were migrating purchase orders. So they had purchase orders to the tune of about 100,000 purchase orders, and each on an average about 7 to 10 lines per purchase order. So that's 700, 800,000 lines of purchase orders. And this is after cleansing and after getting rid of redundant POs or POs that have been far too long in terms of when they've been open. Now, this organization at that point somehow chose to do their entire data migration using Excel. And what they did was, so when you migrate a purchase order, sorry, I'm getting into a bit of detail, but I hope this is helpful. Well, you first have to get the suppliers. You have to get the suppliers into SAP. You then have to get the new supplier IDs from SAP and then map them against the PO. And that mapping exercise of the old supplier ID to the new supplier ID for the POs to be migrated was done using Excel. Except when somebody copy-pasted the whole list of new supplier IDs and they pasted it into Excel, they had the filter on. What happened was there was one supplier ID that ended up being mapped against 350 old supplier IDs. Now that itself is a bit of a disaster. But here's what happened next. That mapping was then used for these 800,000 purchase orders. And as a result, about 25,000 purchase orders that were supposed to be mapped to these 350 suppliers got mapped to one supplier. Now that one supplier would have had, probably the best dream of their lives, except that it wasn't going to last. Now, unwinding that closer to go live was such a big nightmare. It's something that took them days to unwind. And a simple Excel sort of mistake created problems. Now that's as far as mid-flight is concerned. What happens post go live? Now, in a number of organizations, what happens is, because your requirements for reporting, analytics, and information is constantly evolving, people revert to Excel. So yes, you have a set of standard reports, you have a set of dashboards, and let's say you've implemented something like a data lake, you've got capability, but people still find Excel easier to use. I see a number of organizations across Australia and New Zealand, for example, who have converted all their accountants into Excel gurus. And that's something which leads to a lot of failed implementations and troubled implementations. either before, while you're going live, or after. I'm just having a quick look at the chat box, and yes, you're right. So if you have SAP certified add-ons, that's solved. However, it is not unusual for organizations to have a mixed set of technologies within their landscape. So, for example, there are a number of organizations who use SAP S/4HANA for their finance and procurement and supply chain part of the business, but they would go for a Workday when it comes to HR. Or people would have SAP for S/4HANA for procurement, etc., and they would go for a custom solution for recruitment. It's quite usual in this market to see that kind of a landscape, especially given how SAP's product landscape has evolved, where a few years ago, SAP ECC pretty much covered everything that you needed, right from finance, procurement, supply chain, HR. And you had a few add-ons like the SRMs and the MDMs, but more or less the core was there. But now that's for HR, you've got SuccessFactors. For contingent workforce, you've got Fieldglass. For sourcing and procurement, you've got Ariba. Then you've got Concur for expense management. Now, since that's increasing, that's giving customers a lot of choice. And this is where the challenge of managing the add-ons and being aware of it is something you need to be cognizant of. It's not something you can't manage, but when you're dealing with so big chunks of work, it's quite easy to neglect them. And some of these can come back to bite you. Now, we all hear about people and change and communication in that. Even technology finds it difficult to communicate with each other. So here's a case in point. I was leading a large telecom organization's ERP and HRIS replacement last year because they had separated from a big group here in New Zealand, and they were bought by a bunch of private equity investors. Now, this organization had finance who were extremely keen on going with SAP because they believed in the power of what S/4HANA and the finance functions within that did. Procurement supply chain was predominantly outsourced, especially supply chain and logistics. So they had third-party systems and third-party logistics providers who would take care of that. HR, on the other side, were extremely invested in Workday from a HRIS perspective for the user experience. And in this part of the world, the user experience and mobility are quite big. I know that's catching up across the world, but especially in New Zealand, that's quite big. Now, to keep all of these in sync, and they also had a number of legacy applications that they had to deal with. And this organization, for some reason, was also fascinated by this whole event-driven architecture and CI/CD pipelines and DevOps kind of concepts. Now, if you look at the event-driven architecture, they were also fascinated on Kafka. So Kafka is an event-driven sort of middleware technology that's in use. What they struggled with is, because of the number of best-of-breed solutions that they were planning to go with, getting each of these solutions to talk to each other, even though each one of them had natively built integrations and APIs or microservices that could be consumed, it was a disaster for them. It took them a whole 6 months to come up with an integration strategy that would help them leverage these best-of-breed applications. And quite often, this particular problem is not well understood until you are quite deep into the implementation. And that's when things start blowing out of proportion and you struggle. So it's something to watch out for. Now, the next one is something that I read recently in the CIO.com magazine. So while 80% of organizations are accelerating their digital transformation, and almost every organization now has some or the other version of digital transformation. What's interesting to note is 80% of CIOs who were surveyed in that particular initiative reported that they were dealing with a whole heap of legacy applications that should have been replaced 5-10 years ago. Okay? And the challenge for digital transformation initiatives is really how much of technical debt you're carrying while you're modernizing and literally embracing the new technologies to drive better customer experience, efficiencies in your business, and better profitability. Now, the more legacy applications you deal with, the slower will be your ability to drive benefits from a digital transformation. It's like a runway, right? Now, if you have a runway, you would expect the plane to have some friction, which will keep it on the ground, but you would not have a gravel road. Imagine landing a plane on a gravel road at that kind of speed. That's the challenge you have with legacy applications and technical debt. Some of them are so old that they've been custom built by one or two individuals who came up with a bespoke solution, and then they've customized it to the extent possible because it was easy to do. And now you have trouble unwinding them. And in some cases, if these organizations are dealing with people who have already left the organization, it becomes even more difficult. Now, that's the easy part, technology. The challenge is, because the business has been used to getting whatever they want from these kind of bespoke applications and legacy technologies, the mindset change to adopt standard best-in-class sort of processes becomes far more difficult. This also complicates your change management journey. So it's something to watch out for. Now, when I first came to New Zealand, I bought a car for about $9,500. And it's been 7 years. I still have the same car. And on an average week, I spend about $50 to $75 in petrol. So if it's $50, then 52 weeks, it's about $2,500 a year. For 7 years, $2,500, I've spent over and above what the car cost me. I haven't even talked about maintenance and repairs and those kind of things. Now, it's the same with this whole software as a service sort of world. What you spend far more in keeping the solution up to date. And it also is a good thing in one aspect. It forces you down the path of continuous improvement. It almost is a commitment that you make when you sign up to software as a service kind of solutions as part of your digital transformation. But it requires effort. And quite a few organizations that I'm seeing when I'm working with them is they fail to understand that. In the urge to drive efficiencies and reduce cost, what they forget is this big engine that you're spinning up still requires ongoing support, and it requires ongoing investment. So if that's not there in your business case, mid-flight might be the right time to have that conversation. Quite a lot of organizations struggle with this when they go live and the program team starts to vanish. That brings us to the next bit here. Now, a lot of organizations employ consultants and external system integration partners or other agencies to help them on their digital transformation journey, which is a good thing because you get to leverage the expertise and experience that these organizations and their people have and support you on your journey. Because end of the day, your organization is the best at doing what they do. So if you are producing, transformers, then that's your business. So you're good at doing what you're doing. You're leveraging the right partners to help you out. Now, quite a lot of organizations struggle when it comes to the stage where the programs have gone live, your hypercare or early life support is getting over, and you have to now almost stand up on your own feet. And this is the time when consultants and these organizations who've been supporting you start to ramp down, and you haven't prepared for it. You've been sitting next to them, you've been observing them, you've had input into the design, you've had input into the build, you've tested along with them, you've done all of that, but you've just sat next to the driver. You haven't taken control of the steering and driven. The sooner you do this, the better for you, because otherwise you would leave and it will become a complete nightmare to sustain this kind of a solution. In fact, I remember a couple of years ago, I was implementing SAP for a global organization, and they had taken over a small New Zealand company. And we went live on time, so that was fine. It was a fairly straightforward implementation. When it came to support, we asked the implementation team saying, hey, what's the support looking like? Because it was driven globally. And what happened was this consultant gave the number of one person, and I, a nominated individual, and it said, hey, by the way, if you struggle with support, just call this person. And that person would only attend to calls when they woke up in the India time zone, and nothing else would happen around that time. So the whole first half, when everything would get moving here in New Zealand, the team were left like sitting ducks with literally no support whatsoever. So it's important to look at what your support model is going to be when it comes to going live. That brings us to the next point. Now, what if you had no driver? So it's all good. And when you're observing these agencies and these consultants and taking over, so that's one aspect of it. But what's equally important is, as part of these digital transformation initiatives, every organization picks up some of their best employees and seconds them into the program, seconds them to this digital transformation initiative. So, and makes them business leads, change champions, product owners. You can call them whatever you want. But essentially, these are people who've got expertise in business, who've got a vision for the future, who can contribute in shaping that future. Now you've got them, you put them into the digital transformation initiative, and they've gone through an improvement journey. They've learned so much through this journey that their mind has been stretched. They are now a completely different set of individuals compared to what they were when you started the initiative. A lot of organizations I see are struggling with this today, because what's happening is you've got these individuals who've now become far more capable, skilled, experienced, and they're a much better package than they were before. You've gone live, the transformation is winding down, and you have no plan for these people. These people just do not know what their next plan is. And they have two choices. Either they go back to their operational role from what they were doing and start picking that up. Now, imagine if you were asked to do a job that you were doing 15 years ago. Okay. how would you feel? It's exactly the same with these individuals. And in my experience, a lot of these individuals end up leaving these organizations, and they either get poached by the consulting firms themselves, or they go and join another organization. Imagine the amount of IP and talent that walks out of the door. Now, if you bring this down to practical level, with the 2 or 3 month sort of notice period for new individuals to replace these people, you can imagine the amount of time you've lost and translate that into money and consequences for the organization. That's one part of it. The second part is really, how does that impact people who are remaining? Okay, it makes their life far more difficult. And retention of these key people, as you've rightly said, Aroraji, is key. If you are struggling to retain these people, your implementations and the subsequent benefits will really be hard work for you. Now, the last bit. Getting fit is easy. Staying fit takes work. Now, if somebody has to reduce weight or get fit or change their posture, and they undertake a focused project sort of initiative, it's easy to get into shape. It's easy to get into the kind of fitness levels you want. Maintaining those are a challenge. If any of you are soccer fans, you would have seen Diego Maradona when he was in his prime. Athletic, nimble, fast, completely fit and agile. Yet, once he passed his peak, around 1994, when he played this last World Cup, you should have seen the shape of Diego Maradona, completely different. How many people do you see have completely gone out of shape? It's the same with technology and digital transformation initiatives. Once you've gone live, if you don't commit to ongoing continuous improvement and have a clear mechanism of trying to leverage what makes your business click, what are the demands that your customers, your internal stakeholders have of technology to help them deliver a better customer experience, more efficiencies, and better profitability, you will really struggle to sustain. This was one of the challenges, as many of you would have faced, when you were upgrading from on-premise applications to the cloud, where the on-premise applications weren't upgraded for so long that any sort of incremental upgrade just became impossible because the product vendors wouldn't support it. Now, that whole thing has been completely short-circuited with software as a service, because you now have an ongoing upgrade. So, for example, SuccessFactors, I don't know if it's still 3 months. Every 3 months, you get an upgrade. Okay, while SAP makes sure that it doesn't impact core functionality. If you've had a number of other systems and applications and processes hooked up to SuccessFactors, example ServiceNow, example Active Directory, it's on you to make sure that all of that works. SAP will take care of SuccessFactors, but it's for you to make sure everything else works. What this means is, beyond your big digital transformation initiative, you actually need to retain that mindset of undergoing transformation on a continuous basis. If you don't do that, you will end up with a lot of troubled implementations. And failed implementations don't stop at go live, they actually continue beyond. I'll stop here. I hope this has been of value to you. I'm happy to pause and take some feedback. And Mukesh, back to you for any questions and stuff.
Thanks, Ganapati, for taking us through the content. So maybe before we actually go into a round of Q&A, I think there was a lot of chat that was happening along the lines as well, right? So, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory. That is, so as one of my friends used to say, things that are probably obvious are the ones where we make a lot of mistakes. Everyone, when we talk about digital transformation, we all know what are some of the things that needs to be done, what are some of the things that should be avoided. But still, those are the very same topics that we end up finding it difficult to kind of implement. So now I'm going to try something new. We have not done this before in this format. The idea is I'm going to put all of you into breakout rooms, including Ganapati. You will end up in one of the breakout rooms. What I want you to do is amongst yourselves, I want you to probably take a minute or two to talk about what did you learn the most from the conversation today. Or you can talk about what is it that you think needs to be worked upon, and come back and we can have a conversation along those lines. Is that okay with everyone? Or do you want to go straight into Q&A? We can do either ways.
Just one thing, Mukesh. What I'll also do is I'll send you a link after this call, or I'll probably try and paste it in the chat. And people who are interested can download a digital copy of my book, directly from my website. So this is just part of my.
I think you should put the link on the chat right away.
I'll do that.
I think, yeah. So I think there is some chat happening. So let's do Q&A here directly. So let's not go into breakout rooms. Any questions for Ganapati? I have a question. So you spoke about the fact that the importance of having a plan ready for the core team members, right? Once the project goes live. Now, this is not as much a question for you, Ganapati, but for everyone else on the call. Have you seen that after you've gone live with a particular project, you've seen what people call as brain drain, which is people leaving after having successfully implemented a particular complex project in your organization, going out for greener pastures? If yes, is there something that you've done for subsequent projects that might be of interest to everyone else? Anyone wants to share? You can unmute yourself and talk to us about it. Have you seen something like this, or is this something that we are just theorizing?
Ganapati, this is Murli here. Recently, I think you heard about in the media that Infosys project on the income tax portal is a failed project. Everybody is bombarding and jumping on the social media. From your point of view, from your experience, can you just throw some more light why that project has failed from the Infosys perspective?
Look, I haven't been too across it. I've been reading some of it, but what really seems to be, there are two things that are clearly coming out of this. One is, I think they were caught sleeping at the wheel. So, these problems weren't new, so they were probably there, but they discovered it a bit late. And the second bit that I see is that the responsiveness was probably lacking. I think people underestimated the seriousness of it till it suddenly became a big issue. And to be honest, once people acknowledge it, it'll get solved. Okay, I have no doubt. Most of the challenges that I've seen organizations face with this kind of thing, and here, of course, it's a much larger sort of scale, is when you struggle to acknowledge or you haven't found this. Once you found it and the right people are there, you will get through. It's like Amazon. I don't know how many of you try to get something resolved in Amazon. If you find the right person, resolution is smooth. But finding that right person and finding what the issue is probably the thing that takes the longest time. I think with this Infosys thing, they've probably now crossed that bridge, and now you'll see the resolution being far more faster than what it has been. But it's created a lot of angst, and it's also been a bit of a tool for Infosys bashing over the last few weeks, which I've seen.
So there is a question from Sunil on the chat. He's asking, who is normally billed for a failed digital transformation project? Is it the IT department? Is it the consultant? Or is it the end user?
Look, I think there's a gentleman by the name of Henrico Dolfink. He's the CIO of PwC New Zealand. But what he also does, and he has his own website, he documents a lot of failed projects, and he then reflects on what could have been done better. Now, in my experience, unless there has been gross neglect and completely incompetent kind of implementation, it is very difficult to pin an IT vendor or any consultant down. Okay. And equally, people who leave, and the other challenge we are also having currently is the average lifespan of senior executives in organizations is also significantly reducing. So I do not know who gets billed for it, but in my experience, it's eventually the people who are left to pick it up in operations. And those are the people who end up dealing with all the trauma that results with it. The consultants go, right? I've finished the project, I'm done, I'm gone. As a leadership person, if I'm already planning to make my move, I'm done, unless I'm staying. But the people who have to deal with this are really the B suite, as I call it, the mid-management and the actual people who run operations, who eventually end up picking this going forward. And trust me, it's a lot of pain. I've seen organizations run for 2, 3, 5 years before they can get it to a state where they can breathe easy. And it's quite traumatic.
Thanks. And I'm still waiting. I have not heard from anyone regarding what do you do for planning? How do you plan to retain your people after a go live? While we wait for that, I think Mr. Arora has asked a question. Challenges around how to reduce the cost of a project. So, do you want to respond to that, Ganapati?
Yes. And, I've managed a lot of budgets for these kind of programs. In my experience, there's no one answer to this. But if you have the right people at the right stage, that's one way of managing the expenses. Because what happens in my experience is if you have the right people at the right stage, you can get a lot of the prep work and the readiness work done in time, and you can then significantly ramp down. What organizations typically do is they try to push that cost towards the later half of the implementation. And then by the time they incur that person's cost and they bring people on, it becomes too late, and then they have to firefight. Now, the other challenge with managing cost is because these kind of programs have a large external contingent, every week of delay is huge. So if you are running a $30 million, sorry, I speak in dollars, I've lost a bit of touch with rupees over the last few years. But if you're running a $30 million implementation for a 3-year program, that's roughly $1 million a month, majority of which is external spend. If you don't have the right people, you're going to struggle. So for me, absolutely getting the right people and investing in selecting the right consultants or even the right people from within your business is probably the best way to reduce costs or manage costs. Everything else you can try, but they won't have a significant impact. It's people who drive your costs, especially in implementations. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it makes. As you rightly said, right? So the biggest cost is in terms of cost of delay. The other way to look at it, as far as I'm concerned, cost is always subjective. Cost with respect to what? Now, that's a question that not a lot of us ask. What is the real cost with respect to the value that you're looking at as well? So maybe that's something that could be thought of as well. There's another question. Is there a measurement framework for evaluating a success or failure of a digital transformation project? Have you come across one? And by the way, Ganapati, just so that you know, it looks like the link only allows for people in New Zealand. When they apply the coupon code, it is hardwired for New Zealand.
Oh,
So just so that you know,
okay.
you can do that later. Maybe I'll
Yeah.
download it and share the books
Sure.
with everyone
Sure.
else.
Okay. Look, that's a bit of testing failure, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, Sunil has said he's been able to download. Maybe Sunil, while we answer the question, Ganapati answers the question, you can just share how.
Yeah. So
So
look,
don't
there are-
enter that country. This is not a default requirement of that form to be filled.
Okay, cool. So let's come back to the question, Ganapati. Is there a measurement framework for evaluating success or failure of a digital transformation project?
In my experience, I haven't seen a comprehensive framework, okay, to evaluate the success or failure of a digital transformation. I think what typically people look at is when you look at how it's going, they predominantly tend to focus on outcomes and benefits to the customers. Now, if you look at digital transformations, you have to look at it while the journey is in full flight and once the journey has happened. Now, how the implementation's delivered is a lagging indicator. I mean, it's really, if the implementation is delivered well, the chances of it, the leading indicator, the chances of it realizing the benefits are also easier, because what happens is if you run into trouble with a digital transformation initiative, your focus immediately shifts from the value and the benefits to actually getting the project across the line. And in my experience, I haven't seen too many frameworks that capture that. In fact, I've been working on one and it's still work in progress. McKinsey has something, BCG have their own. There are also a couple of other organizations who have their own sort of framework. But to be honest, I haven't seen a comprehensive framework that actually helps you measure the success or failure of a digital transformation. But look, it's a good question. It's probably an avenue for me to do some more detailed research, because I've been thinking of this for quite some time.
Anyone here on the call has seen some framework or used some framework that you would like to share? Because in this call, we have collective wisdom, which is a lot more than you would otherwise see. Yeah, Sunil, you have something to say?
Yeah, so I think, while as Ganapati said, there are various frameworks from McKinsey's and this big consulting firm. What is available and which is a practice in the industry is a model which is called digital disruption model. Eventually, transformation is also a radical change or a disruption. So there are very clear kind of frameworks available. How do you filter those ideas? You collect those ideas, filter it from and use that different lenses to evaluate each and every kind of initiative and what will result in what kind of a transformation is something which is there more from the filtering and identifying point of view. But yes, measurement is something which is very again subjective depending upon the priority on which the company want to measure. So that framework is still very, very hazy. But before that, whatever is in terms of putting those variables and parameters is already there. And McKinsey has a very good framework for that.
Yeah. So as Ganapati also said, and as you have also said, Sunil, I think measuring success is depending on what is it that you are measuring, right? So which means that are you clear in terms of what exactly are you going to get value if I remember correctly, there was a chat earlier as well. If you know what value you are driving towards, then you can have measurement metrics in place in order to measure whether you've arrived there or not, or whether you've kind of, how far you've come from there or not. So that's every organization, when they start on a journey like this, I think needs to have very clearly defined end goals, or at least the area where they would like to reach in order to call a particular project successful or or a failure, right? As long as that is defined and you are able to kind of, continuously on an ongoing basis measure the progress and course correct when you kind of go sideways, at the end, you will know whether or not a particular project has succeeded or failed on your expectations. So that's what I would say from my perspective. So I see there is another post on the chat. Okay, so it was just down. So any other questions for?
Mukesh, just to add to your, even the value, unless and until it figures on your balance sheet, is not something which can be quantified. Some of these value, what we talk about, is very, very kind of abstract, and it is not an asset which gets created and displayed on a balance sheet. So it is difficult, to measure even the value part also, because it is not reflecting on your financials.
And that's the challenge. That is the challenge.
Yes.
If this was captured through a particular metric, I think people would have captured it long ago. It would have been very easy, and then you would have measured it, you would have done it. Measuring this is really what the challenge is.
Anyone else? Any questions for Ganapati? So on the chat, while you were presenting as well, the model of agile came up, right? And the question of Spotify. Just wanted to quickly do a dipstick check here amongst all of you. How many of you are seeing agile being adopted in your organization? Maybe you can use the reactions to give a thumbs up or a show of hands to say if anyone is using agile in your organization. Okay, so Murali says yes. Okay, not many. So maybe it's more prevalent in software companies rather than anyone else. So yeah, okay. Manohar is trying. Manohar, do you want to unmute yourself and maybe share what's happening?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, see, we just last year we went live last September for one of our. I mean, it's a major transformation program to move away from a legacy system in North America, and we are moving to S4HANA. And the first entity on a small scale, we went live last year. And I mean, I don't know much about it. I'm not part of the team. I'm now engaged to see the feasibility of upgrading. They are on 1809 to upgrade to 2020 S4. And they are using safe agile method. There is a scrum of scrums. Team is organized by technical product owners who are basically our senior functional SMEs. We have developers, of course, and we have business product owners, the counterparts of technical product owners. And yeah, I mean, so far it's been running in an agile mode. But the agility is coming from a perspective of number of entities, which business entity, which process they are putting live.
Yeah. So just to put it in perspective, Manohar is from Schneider, so that people can understand. Yeah, Sunil is also talking about the SAP Activate methodology. Okay. So if maybe in last call for questions, otherwise I'll just wait for 30 seconds. If there are no further questions, then I would like to really thank Ganapati for your time, for your insights, and for your generous offer of the book. I hope everyone was able to download the book. If you think that the session was useful, I would really appreciate if you can just drop an email to me and share that it was useful, so that I can invite more thought leaders like Ganapati to kind of participate and share their insights with all of us. So thank you so much. And thanks so much, Ganapati, for taking time and sharing your insights with us.
No, my pleasure. Look, thank you so much for giving up your time. I think that's the most valuable part that you've given up for this, and really appreciate you guys staying on and contributing to the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and everyone, stay safe, and thanks for your time. Talk to you later. Bye.